Hey folks, and welcome back. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to stop in for another drawing lesson. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe, comment, and like if you wish. The forum is open for suggestions, comments, whatever. Love to hear from all of you. Today's lesson is just going to emphasize a little more knowledge in the skull. I'd like to re-examine some of the areas of the skull that I've gone over in the past videos. I wasn't as clear as I would have liked to have been, and for my own knowledge and for the sake of passing knowledge on to youngsters, I'd like to actually make sure my terminology, proper understanding, like my own proper understanding for this this curriculum is as sharp as can be, so that not only I'm understanding it, but you are too. To begin, let's take a look at a profile view of the skull. We've got some areas in here that I've already drawn attention to. The temporal line, just to review, is that section of your brow, essentially, that starts to come off of your cranium, and it forms this divot right in here, which ends up being your temples. Okay, hence why it's called the temporal line. All right, because it goes over your temples. Again, inside the temporals themselves, you've got the sphenoid bone. Okay, there's a series of bones that are all connected by a series of fissures. Fissures are those squiggly little lines that I've drawn in there, connecting different portions of the cranium together. Okay, this in the middle here, the lacrimal. Okay, that's a pretty important bone. I was actually trying to hint at it last week, and I've got another name for that area in there that I want you to pay attention to. We'll go over when we get to a frontal view of the skull here. But the lacrimal bone is, I find it pretty important because it is the starting point and shape of your eye socket, essentially, the inner shape of your eye socket. And a lot of that bone actually shows in your face. Your skin rides pretty tightly over top of it. But to understand how that area works, you know, where the further surface ends, how far back the socket goes, etc., etc., the better understanding you have of that, the better you'll be able to place your eyeballs inside of that socket and know how muscle and flesh and the bone are working around the eyeball. Okay, so the lacrimal bone, I'm going to make reference to it, and the other bone it's paired up to there in the socket. Photoshop is very finicky. Below you have the what is known as the nasal spine. It's this little portion right here jutting out. If you were looking at the nasal bone front on, you would see that that line deep within the cavity there, and that's actually what that spine is. That bone actually comes within the nasal bone itself and out in front, and that's what that little angled lip that my mouse is on right there detailing, that's what that is. Not important, not super important, but it's a good point of reference, so that you know where the nose and nostrils and all that sit in. And we're going to use these exact examples. We're going to use these exact examples that I've drawn here in the future to draw eyes, and nose, mouth, other features over top of, so that you can get a good idea of what those so you can get a good idea of what those proportions look like in the face. God, nailed it. All right. Last thing I wanted to show you on this profile shot of the skull is the maxilla, which I've introduced you to in prior videos, I'm pretty sure. There's another portion butted up in that area I'm going to introduce you to as we look at the frontal view of the skull here. But yeah, essentially you've got the maxilla, which is all of this area encased around your nasal bone process, okay? And the maxilla is what is connected to the area below. It has a name, I'll get to that in a second. It holds your teeth, okay? Let's go down to the frontal view of the skull here. So, looking straight at the face, I just broke down one side of it to make it simple here, okay? And a little zoomed in so that we can really see what I'm trying to get across to you, alright? Starting at the very top, you've got your frontal bone. So that's what I'm going to call from now on. You can see it here on my old aging face, but my frontal bone protrudes quite a bit. Okay, even from a profile, you can see it protruding quite a bit. Okay, that rides down into your supraorbital foramen. All right, which I've described to you before. In the lighting here, you can see my supraorbital foramen just popping right off of my brow, okay? So, you know, I don't know if yours is prominent in your face. Maybe it'll be the older you get, but at my age, that shit pops off like I'm wearing a mask, you see? So, below that, you've got the sphenoid bone there, which I pointed out, rides over top of your temporal area and is behind your temporal lines and the temporal bone, okay? Before, I wasn't mentioning the temporal bone. I should have been in those videos I've posted in the past. The temporal bone is right here. It's going from your temporal line, okay? Just coming down in here. And this, right in here, beside your eyeball, is that temporal bone, okay? Right there. So if you look at the screen, at the diagram, the little mouse is going over that area. It's right in there. Before we get to the zygomatic bone underneath it, I just want to take a look inside the eye socket for a second. I mentioned before, you've got the lacrimal, which I mentioned, okay? That's how it looks from the front, okay? And you can see the lacrimal, all right, is actually inside the eye socket. You've got the top of the eye socket right here overlapping and protruding. That's actually one of the most, that's one of the closest areas in the foreshortened view of the skull to the camera, to the eye of the beholder here, all right? So when we look at the lacrimal, it's coming underneath that this bone right here, the supraorbital foramen, and underneath and out into the zygomatic bone, all right, which is the cheekbone. Do you see and understand how that works? Now, you're going to have to take it upon yourself to really understand the depth from this area where the mouse is to this next level playing field, which is a couple of millimeters behind it, etc., as you get down into the cavity, which is the eye socket itself, okay? Or the depression, I don't know. The socket, it's the socket, okay? It's a fucking socket, man. The superior orbital fissure and the inferior orbital fissure, okay? I don't think you have to note that area too much. Your eyeball is basically going to cover all of that. But I would note this little bone area in front of it, okay? Because that's actually what your eyeball buds up against, all right, inside the eye socket, and it's what creates and begins to create the flap of your lower eyelid, actually. And I have a diagram here. The lacrimal right here in my diagram is this line coming out. I've drawn it in red, okay? That line coming down and out, okay? Just behind it is the inferior orbital fissure, okay? And that's actually butting up against my eyelid, creating a divot, and and thus creating the bottom eyelid curling over top of the protruding eyeball. Okay, sitting there in the socket. All right, back to the diagram. You've got underneath the temporal bone and the inferior orbital fissure. Excuse me, got that out of my mouth all right. As you can tell, it's dark. It's late at night. I'm trying to squeeze this lesson out in less than 15 minutes. That's not going to happen if I keep yakking. Anyways, onto the zygomatic bone. We know where that is. That's, as we look at the face here, you know, it's riding right in front here. Okay. You can see mine if I pull my skin back. See? Look at the angle. My fingers are butting up against the side of the zygomatic bone. Okay? Zygomatic process that I've taught you about. Comes back and rides along here, up into the ear. Okay? Up or up behind the ear, rather. The ear sits below it, okay? And over it. Weird, I know. Who designed us, yo? So, zygomatic bone. Underneath that, we know the maxilla. Again, from the front, that kind of, those three little dots kind of indicate the area that it is really responsible for being named. And then below it, what I was going to mention was the alveolar process, and that is what holds your teeth in place, okay? You have all these names here. You have all these areas that I really want you to pay attention to. These are more or less those structural points in the face or in the skull that are always present in the face when you draw it. Like I've said in prior videos, it gives your drawings and designs a lot of strength, a lot of character, and the combinations of how you can push and pull these features in the face are endless. Okay, for guys, for females, doesn't matter. Anyway, we'll keep this video right there. I think that's a lot to take in, and now you have this. Bookmark it, like it, comment. Test yourself on this stuff, or you know, next time you start studying the face, maybe try to quiz yourself as you go around, and as you study a skull in your hand, you know, make sure to take a note of those exact areas I'm pointing out, because they will show up underneath the skin. Okay, the divots are there for a reason. God, stop talking. Have a great night, people. Thanks for stopping by.